The Vikings came from Scandinavia, the three territories that we know today as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden.
I've heard plenty of stories about ancient shipwrecks, but this one is on another level. A Viking ship? Yes, an actual Viking ship was found, and somehow it's still intact.
This ship is like the symbol of the Viking Age. They've been advancing this technology at times when other people had not bothered.
We're talking about a vessel that's been lost to the sea for centuries, yet it looks like it's been frozen in time. How it stayed preserved this long is a mystery. The salt water, the currents, the storms, none of it took this ship down. And the details? The craftsmanship? The carvings? It's like stepping back 1,000 years into history. In 2018, archaeologists in Norway found something buried under an unassuming stretch of farmland, a 1,200-year-old Viking ship. A 20-meter-long vessel built for someone powerful enough to demand a send-off straight to Valhalla. This wasn't just some lucky discovery. Ground-penetrating radar picked up the unmistakable shape just beneath the soil, a secret hidden for over 1,000 years. Back in the Viking Age, this land was once covered by water, but as the climate changed, the ship got buried under layers of soil. By 2019, archaeologists were peeling back history, uncovering wooden planks and parts of the ship's keel, the backbone of the vessel. The upper sections weren't so lucky, centuries of farming had shredded them, but enough survived to confirm this was no ordinary burial. This was a ship meant for a person of immense importance. Viking burial ships are ridiculously rare. Before Gjellestad, Norway had only recorded 3 others. So when the Gjellestad ship was found, it wasn't just about who was buried there, but what kind of power they held. Viking burials weren't just funerals. They were statements. The dead were loaded up with weapons, treasure, and animals, everything needed for a first-class ticket to the afterlife. Whoever this was, they weren't going to Valhalla empty-handed. Thanks to modern tech like 3D scanning and photogrammetry, archaeologists documented the site without destroying it. They got to study the burial as it was, preserving its story instead of tearing it apart. The past has a way of resurfacing. Some stories refuse to stay buried, and this Viking ship, after 1,000 years in the dirt, is finally ready to be told. Because even after more than 1,000 years, the Vikings still have stories to tell. You just have to know where to dig. And if that wasn't enough to rewrite history, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of what appears to be an ancient Viking defense structure, Stockholm Shipyard. And it's flipping the narrative on how these warriors protected their strongholds. Found near the same region, this wasn't just some wooden fence to keep out nosy neighbors. We're talking about a massive, strategically designed fortification that suggests the Vikings weren't just bold raiders, but tactical masterminds when it came to defending their turf. The structure is built with layers of earth and stone, possibly reinforced with timber, designed to slow down and funnel attackers into vulnerable positions. It's the kind of thing you'd expect from a medieval castle, not a Viking outpost. And this isn't located in the center of the settlement, but spread across strategic choke points, suggesting they were thinking way beyond just defending their homes. They were defending their entire way of life. For years, the image of Vikings has been all about swords, ships, and raiding villages. But this shows they were also thinking long-term, especially the Oseberg ship. Archaeologists unearthed a set of intricately crafted Viking tools, buried beneath what was once a bustling shipyard. But these weren't just everyday tools for patching up longships. They were specialized, precision instruments, evidence that Viking shipbuilding was far more advanced than anyone gave them credit for. We're talking about tools shaped for bending wood, carving intricate designs, and assembling ships with near-perfect symmetry. This find isn't just about what they made, but how they made it. The tools suggest an understanding of woodworking that was ahead of its time, with techniques that allowed them to shape massive oak planks into the sleek, flexible frames Viking ships are known for. It's one thing to build a ship that floats, but it's another to craft a vessel designed to cut through open seas, glide up rivers, and endure brutal conditions. These weren't rough, patchwork boats. They were finely tuned machines of survival, exploration, and conquest. And here's the real crazy part. Some of these tools were designed for delicate, artistic carving, because for the Vikings, it was an extension of identity and power. It had to look the part. Elaborate dragon heads, serpent motifs, and interwoven patterns weren't just decoration. They were symbols of strength, protection, and status. Every carving had a purpose, and these tools were how they made it happen. This discovery doesn't just tell us about Viking technology, it reveals their priorities. They didn't just build to survive, they built to make a statement. Every ship was a declaration of power and legacy, crafted with the same intensity they brought to battle. So when we talk about the Vikings, we're not just talking about warriors. We're talking about engineers, artists, and innovators who shaped history with every plank they laid and every wave they conquered. And just when you think the mystery ends with that sword, another discovery nearby adds a whole new twist to the story. Because Viking history isn't just about what we find, but what we still don't understand. A set of iron arrowheads buried deeper in the same region. But these weren't ordinary weapons. They were deliberately bent, twisted out of shape before being placed in the grave. And that's not some random accident. This was intentional. In Viking culture, destroying a weapon in a burial wasn't about disrespect. It was about sending it to the afterlife. The belief was that a weapon needed to be killed to pass into the next world alongside its owner. If it wasn't destroyed, it couldn't serve its master in the afterlife. And just when you thought that was it, things get even weirder. One arrowhead was perfectly intact, unbroken, sharp, and ready for battle. Was it meant to stay in this world, a guardian against grave robbers, or was it simply overlooked? Either way, it's a detail that's got archaeologists asking deeper questions about how the Vikings viewed life, death, and the journey beyond. And it wasn't just the arrowheads. Under layers of soil, they also uncovered the remnants of a charred wooden shield. Viking shields were usually burned with the body during cremation, but this one survived, blackened and split, but unmistakably intact. Was it a mistake? Or was it meant to be a symbol, left behind as a marker for the dead? Every artifact from this site is a piece of a puzzle that's still missing too many pieces. Why was this shield left behind? Why was one arrowhead spared while the others were destroyed? A forgotten detail buried nearby added an unexpected twist, because Viking history has a habit of hiding its best secrets just out of reach. A short distance from the original hoard, researchers came across another stash of silver. But this one wasn't carefully buried in a lavish cup or chest. It was wrapped in cloth, shoved under a simple flat stone, and left to be forgotten. No intricate carvings, no grand burial site, just a rushed, desperate attempt to keep wealth hidden. And that's got everyone wondering. Was this an emergency stash during a raid? A last-minute effort to hide silver from an approaching enemy? The coins tell a story. Like the Vale of York hoard, this smaller find included Islamic dirhams, Anglo-Saxon silver, and a few Frankish coins. But it wasn't grand, no ornate jewelry, no heavy arm rings. Just currency. The kind of silver you'd need for fast deals, bribes, or paying off enemies. And the location was right near an ancient trade route, the kind of path where a Viking merchant or warrior might need to stash wealth quickly if trouble came knocking. This just goes to show that Viking life wasn't all glory and conquest. Sometimes it was about survival, about knowing when to fight and when to cut your losses and run. Maybe the owner planned to come back for it. Maybe they never got the chance. Either way, that silver sat in the ground for over 1,000 years, silent witness to a moment of fear or strategy that we'll never fully understand. Tucked within the mass of coins and jewelry was something easy to overlook: a single, worn coin from the Byzantine Empire. Not rare by itself, but its presence in Gotland suggests the Vikings weren't just trading along the Silk Road. They were connected to the political and economic heartbeat of Constantinople. This wasn't a casual souvenir. It was proof that Gotlanders didn't just trade with merchants. They were operating in a network that reached the Eastern Roman Empire, negotiating and dealing with some of the world's most powerful players. And it doesn't stop there. Alongside the Byzantine coin was a fragment of silk, an almost impossible survival after centuries underground. Silk wasn't just a luxury, it was a political statement. It meant status, connection, and access to elite trade routes. For a Gotlander to own silk meant they were doing business with empires that most Europeans only heard about in stories. This small detail flips the narrative. The Spillings hoard wasn't just a stash of silver. It was a record of global influence, a snapshot of a Viking world where wealth wasn't just earned through raids, but through calculated deals stretching from the North Sea to the Mediterranean. And it wasn't just coins and metal that mattered. It was access, knowledge, and relationships that shaped who held power and who didn't. But one that caught everyone's eye was a set of intricately crafted animal-shaped brooches from the Valsgerda grave field, unlike anything found in nearby Viking sites. These were symbols of identity, protection, and power. Some believe these brooches were more than fashion statements. They were spiritual talismans meant to guard the dead on their journey to the afterlife. Their detailed designs, shaped like wolves and serpents, weren't random. In Norse mythology, these creatures weren't just beasts. They were guides, guardians, and sometimes omens. But here's the strange part. The brooches weren't placed directly with the bodies, but arranged around the burial sites, almost like markers or protectors, ensuring the dead were shielded from whatever dangers lurked beyond the grave. Why this arrangement? No one's sure. Maybe it was part of a ritual we've long forgotten, or maybe it was a sign that these warriors were considered something more, champions chosen for their strength in life and their role as eternal guardians in death. And that's not all. Traces of foreign materials were found within the burial layers, silk threads, fragments of Byzantine coins, and even small beads that likely originated from the Middle East. These finds hint at trade routes that stretched farther than previously thought, suggesting that even in the Vendel period, Scandinavians were connected to a global network. These weren't isolated warriors. They were part of a world where status wasn't just about local battles, but about distant alliances and rare treasures brought from across continents. It's a reminder that the Valsgerda burials weren't just about honoring the dead. They were about projecting power, influence, and identity to anyone who stood at those graves centuries later. And the deeper archaeologists dig, the clearer it becomes. Valsgerda isn't just a burial site. It's a map of a world where every weapon, every brooch, and every scrap of silk tells a story of power, ambition, and the lengths people would go to be remembered forever. Among the lesser discussed finds has come from the Galloway Viking treasure, a set of unusual silk fragments, something you wouldn't expect to see in a Viking-era hoard in Scotland. Silk was an extreme luxury at the time, a material that only the wealthiest and most powerful could afford. But here's the twist. Scientific analysis revealed that these fragments likely came from the Byzantine Empire, or even farther east, possibly from China. This wasn't just local trade, this was evidence that whoever owned this hoard had access to a global network stretching thousands of miles. Tiny gold-threaded braids, so fine they could only have been made by master craftsmen, were also found wrapped within the layers of cloth. Some believe these were relic wrappings used to protect objects of deep religious significance. If true, it suggests that the person who buried this treasure wasn't just a warrior or a merchant, but someone deeply involved in both faith and diplomacy, someone who dealt in both gold and gods. Even more intriguing was the presence of silver ingots with distinct markings, some resembling Arabic and Persian coinage. These weren't just Viking silver bars. They were pieces of a much bigger system of wealth circulation that connected the British Isles to the Islamic world. The sheer variety of influences, Anglo-Saxon, Viking, Christian, and Middle Eastern, makes the Galloway hoard stand out as more than just a treasure trove. It's a record of a world in flux, where power wasn't just about the sword, but about trade, faith, and alliances that stretched across continents. The biggest mystery remains: why was it buried, and why was it never retrieved? Maybe its owner fled, maybe they fell in battle, or maybe they were waiting for the right moment that never came. But one thing is certain: this hoard wasn't just left behind, it was left with a purpose. And even after 1,000 years, that purpose is still waiting to be fully understood. But not all finds are massive like that. Some things are small, but deeply significant, like an ancient wooden arrow, complete with its iron arrowhead still intact. It's simple, but powerful, a glimpse into the life of a hunter standing on that very mountain centuries ago. What makes it extraordinary is its condition. The shaft was still sharp, the binding still wrapped, preserved by ice for over 1,000 years. You can almost imagine the moment it was dropped, maybe missed in the chaos of a hunt, or left behind after a successful kill. Either way, it froze where it fell, only to be discovered long after the hunter was gone. But the most haunting detail? The arrow's placement. It wasn't found near a well-known hunting spot, but farther up the pass, along a route few dared to tread. Was it a sign of desperation? A risky attempt to hunt in harsher conditions? Or was this part of a larger migration, a movement forced by changing climates even back then? We'll never know for sure, but its discovery adds another question to the growing mystery of how ancient people adapted to these brutal landscapes. And it wasn't alone. Nearby, fragments of ancient leather shoes were pulled from the ice. The wear and tear on the soles tell their own story, of long, punishing journeys across frozen terrain. These weren't just lost belongings, they were essential survival tools, crafted to endure conditions that would break the unprepared. In Denmark, a discovery has surfaced that's turning Viking history on its head. A burial site containing 50 remarkably well-preserved Viking-age skeletons. And it's not just the sheer number that's making headlines. These remains are offering insights that could redefine everything we thought we knew about Viking burial customs, daily life, and identity. Normally, Viking graves leave behind little more than a few teeth, bone fragments, and the occasional rusted weapon or brooch. But not here. These skeletons are almost fully intact. 5 fingers, 5 toes, bones perfectly preserved after over 1,000 years underground. It's the kind of find archaeologists dream about, and it opens up an avalanche of new questions. How did these Vikings live? What did they eat? What diseases did they carry? For the first time, the answers to these questions might actually be within reach. But it's not just the skeletons that are telling stories. The grave goods buried alongside them offer incredible insights into who these people were. One standout item? A beautifully crafted Viking brooch, likely worn by a woman to fasten her clothing. But this wasn't just an accessory. On the back of the brooch, archaeologists found mineralized textile fragments, physical remnants of the clothing these women wore over a millennium ago. Viking textiles rarely survive the passage of time, making this a rare and invaluable glimpse into ancient craftsmanship and fashion. The design, the fabric, even the weaving patterns are all pieces of a puzzle, slowly building a clearer image of Viking life. And it gets deeper. The preservation of these skeletons means researchers now have a rare opportunity to conduct advanced scientific analyses. DNA testing, isotope analysis, and bone chemistry studies can reveal where these Vikings came from. But just when you think you understand it all, something comes up to prove otherwise. Like the Ulfberht blade that didn't quite match the others. On the surface, it carried the same prestigious plus ULFBERHT plus inscription, but metallurgical analysis revealed something strange. The steel wasn't the same high-carbon crucible material that made the original swords so legendary. It was lower quality, riddled with impurities, and weaker in composition. In short, it was a forgery. This finding cracked open a whole new angle on the Ulfbert mystery. Because if there were counterfeit blades, that means the name wasn't just about craftsmanship. It was a brand, a symbol of elite status so powerful that it inspired imitation. And forging that brand, quite literally, became a way to claim power that hadn't been earned. It's like the medieval version of a knockoff Rolex, but instead of fooling people with a shiny wristwatch, these fakes were trying to pass as the ultimate symbol of Viking strength. But here's where it gets more fascinating. The counterfeiters didn't just slap the name on any old blade. They tried to mimic the style, the weight, and even the composition as closely as possible. Which begs the question, how widespread was this black market sword trade? Were these forgeries made in secret, hoping to deceive buyers? Or were they openly sold as good enough versions for warriors who couldn't afford the real thing, but still wanted to flash that Ulfbert name? And while some fakes have been exposed, the origin of the genuine Ulfbert swords remains elusive. Were they all forged in a single master's workshop? Or were they the product of a secret network of blacksmiths trading knowledge along ancient routes from the Middle East to Scandinavia? The real swords, with their perfect steel, still carry secrets that even the sharpest modern technology struggles to crack. But one thing is clear. Owning an Ulfbert sword wasn't just about having a superior weapon. It was about status, identity, and fear. These weren't just blades. They were legends forged in steel. And whether real or fake, they tell a story of ambition, deception, and craftsmanship that historians are still trying to learn the complete truth about to this day. Especially the Oseberg ship. Archaeologists unearthed a set of intricately crafted Viking tools buried beneath what was once a bustling shipyard. But these weren't just everyday tools for patching up longships. They were specialized, precision instruments, evidence that Viking shipbuilding was far more advanced than anyone gave them credit for. We're talking about tools shaped for bending wood, carving intricate designs, and assembling ships with near-perfect symmetry. This find isn't just about what they made, but how they made it. The tools suggest an understanding of woodworking that was ahead of its time, with techniques that allowed them to shape massive oak planks into the sleek, flexible frames Viking ships are known for. It's one thing to build a ship that floats, but it's another to craft a vessel designed to cut through open seas, glide up rivers, and endure brutal conditions. These weren't rough, patchwork boats. They were finely tuned machines of survival, exploration, and conquest. And here's the real crazy part. Some of these tools were designed for delicate, artistic carving, because for the Vikings, it was an extension of identity and power. It had to look the part. Elaborate dragon heads, serpent motifs, and interwoven patterns weren't just decoration. They were symbols of strength, protection, and status. Every carving had a purpose, and these tools were how they made it happen. This discovery doesn't just tell us about Viking technology, it reveals their priorities. They didn't just build to survive, they built to make a statement. Every ship was a declaration of power and legacy, crafted with the same intensity they brought to battle. So when we talk about the Vikings, we're not just talking about warriors. We're talking about engineers, artists, and innovators who shaped history with every plank they laid and every wave they conquered.